Welcome to everybody at this masterclass. It's really great to have you all here. Warm welcome, of course. And we've got a very interesting topic, first of all, 5G and smart cities. And two great speakers, Simon Lumb and Tegan. We're talking about 5G in relation to smart cities, and obviously that's a fascinating possibility, because there is now an increased understanding that cities will have to up their performance in relation to making sure that they provide the right services to the citizens, in relation to create jobs and be sure that the economic viability of the city is secured for the future. And technology can very much help that in that area. I see that very much as a tool. It's not an end in itself. Yeah, it is basically providing citizens and businesses with tools that allow them to then use them to their advantage, to increase the opportunities of their lifestyle, the way they live in the city, communicate with others. Community life can obviously be great, and hence we already see that with the many Facebook groups and community groups that are available on the internet. On the other side, we are in a global society, despite the fact that we now pretty isolated. In all reality, the world is much smaller. Companies and people are making a decision where they're going to live, where they're going to work, where the opportunities are, what the lifestyle opportunities are. And based on that, they make increasingly more decisions of what's going to happen. So in that respect, it's important for the cities that they are competitive, that they are competing. And if you talk about the bigger cities, and Melbourne, of course, today is part of this conversation, they are competing internationally. There's business can make a decision. Are we going to Los Angeles? Are we going to Amsterdam, Copenhagen? Are we going to Singapore? So in order for us to make sure that we are competitive, we need to have cities that understand the way that we are going. Now, I've been involved in this now for the last decade, roughly, and I can say that the majority of cities in Australia are still not at that level. I mean, we've got, of course, the top cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, but also Ipswich. Newcastle is, in my opinion, a leader. Canberra, Bendigo, Moreton Bay. So there are, a dozen or so cities that are leading, but then there will be hundreds, that still, have to start this process. And I think this particular masterclass hopefully also helps in giving those cities a better understanding of how they will have to evolve, how they can participate, what they need to do. So there's a clear message in it for cities to get their act together and start becoming involved in it. We cannot leave this to the telcos, and it's great to have Simon here, of course, as from Telstra. But at the same time, in order for you cities to be able to discuss this with Telstra and others, Vodafone, Optus, big companies that are involved in this, technology providers like Ericsson's or Cisco or whatever, IBM's, you will need to have a good understanding of what you want as a city, where you fit in, and then negotiate and discuss that with organizations such as Telstra and others. But you need to be an equal partner in this, in that process, and you need actually be the leader, as a city to take this forward. I don't know, Mark, if you already did put the polls up. There are two polls that we have prepared, and we just would like to give you a minute, dear delegates, to fill in the polls, and we show in a minute what the results are. Mark, are you ready for that?
Yes, if everyone could look to the chat, there's a link there in the chat.
So as you can see, it's the level of maturity where your organization is in, and obviously, what are you interested in? You know, what sort of applications are you looking at? Really interesting. Yeah, we are really at this early process. Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. And also it's interesting to see that the majority are in that category of the more advanced applications, the IoT and the M2M applications. Yeah, I think, you know, that from the maturity level, it's clear that the Masterclass is spot on. Yeah, it is really a process of education that we offer you guys. And yeah, it's really interesting also to see that we are looking very much at the new level of IoT. And I'm pretty sure that our two speakers are not going to disappoint you with those issues. Okay, so we're starting with Tegan. Tegan Kopp from the city of Melbourne. And the city of Melbourne is definitely one of the leading cities in smart cities in Australia. They have been involved in this now for many years already. And they have built a whole team of people around it. The interesting thing that I find with Melbourne is that it's no longer just a team that's doing it, but they have been able to start embedding smart city thinking across the organizations. And while it's still a difficult process, specifically in large cities, there are lots of ivory towers and lots of silos. But you know, there is definitely, because of the fact that they've taken it, that they were involved at an early stage, yeah, more and more people within council are starting to understand that it's part of their job and not part of just the job of Tegan and her colleagues, of course. So Melbourne is also the first city, as far as I know, that is working together with Telstra on this 5G pilot test. So there will be that will be an interesting early experience that Tegan is going to share with us. Yeah. Now Tegan will be followed by Simon Lumb, and Simon, of course, is, as I already mentioned, from Telstra. Now Telstra is, you know, we can all be quite proud of it that Australia has been leading the mobile world thanks to Telstra now for I think more than a decade. We were amongst the first, you know, to come up with 3G and 4G. We have a very competitive environment with 3 players in it. You know, we are definitely, if you compare us on the mobile network where we are on the international ladder, we're right in the top. If you compare that with the fixed network, we you know, unfortunately at the bottom. It really shows that the mobile market in Australia is working very much so. And because of that competition level, there is the need for these organizations to actually to be innovative and come up with new developments. And therefore, Telstra obviously is one of the first, and also again one of the leaders in deploying 5G. I just heard today further announcements were made in regards to developments in the network in Queensland and Tasmania, amongst other places. So there really is this this leadership from Telstra that I'm pretty sure Simon is going to share with us. Okay, that's it for me. I'll come back later on when in question time. But now the floor is yours, Tegan. please tell us more about the fascinating developments in Melbourne, and also perhaps a bit of an overview of where, where 5G fits into the rest of the smart city activities that Melbourne is doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? See a nice big screen with City of Melbourne, 5G lessons learned. Is that what everyone's got?
Yeah, it's there, Tegan.
Awesome, fabulous. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So thanks everybody for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Tegan Kopp and I'm the emerging testbed lead at the City of Melbourne. I just wanted to say firstly, I'm joining you from Williamstown, which first residents were the Yalukut Willem clan of the Kulin Nation, where innovation has played a part for tens of thousands of years. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and Aboriginal elders of other communities who might be joining us here today. So my job at the City of Melbourne is to lead our emerging tech testbed and progress our digital urban infrastructure maturity. And really the emerging tech testbed is really hard to explain, but I'll try my best. It's a system of relationships, processes, policies, and digital and physical environments, which enables multiple parties to work together to test new and emerging tech like 5G and IoT for city, community and organisational benefit. So the testbed was really established to investigate how local government can collaborate with industry partners and support the rollout of modern technologies in a way that enables access to shared city data. It enables citizens, local businesses and government agencies and researchers to access and benefit from the modern technologies. It also creates new opportunities for Melbourne businesses at home and abroad and encourage inward investment. Today, I'd like to share some insights on how and why we're taking the approach to 5G that we are taking and how we work and partner with the community and business to build our future city and why we think that's important. 5G and the tech that it's connected to along with it presents both opportunities and risks for us about how we plan, use and manage our city now and into the future. So we really, at the City of Melbourne, we want a 5G future that happens with us, not to us. There's unprecedented complexity and challenges of 5G, which I'm sure you heard about some of last Masterclass, but they create a great opportunity for us to start exploring and testing to increase the ideal likelihood of an ideal and preferred future so that 5G doesn't happen to us, it happens with us. And really to be seen as a leader, the City of Melbourne, we need to respond to the rapid speed of 5G development with immediate action, which is what we've been doing, and to really address the following things. There's uncoordinated telecommunication activity is happening around the city. That's due to, in part, City of Melbourne is a complex beast. We have many different departments that telecommunication activity can hit. We've got our infrastructure and assets team, we've got our design team, we've got our heritage team, we've got our parks and open spaces team, that activity has been uncoordinated to present day. And also around the Telecommunication Act and not having master access agreements with telecommunications companies means that things done bit by bit. And it's hard to have a bigger picture. And most of that activity is starting to happen under the low impact clause of the Telecommunication Act, which again makes it even more harder to get a bigger picture of what's happening. But it's also, and then we're only one of many major infrastructure owners in our municipality. So there's us, there's City Power, and then, there's Yarra Trams and Public Transport Victoria. So there's lots of different players in the market who all have telecommunications activity happening on their assets. And we also have, the City of Melbourne, we also identify we've got really slow processes in place. It can take anywhere from 6 to 24 months to progress something, depending on the particular part of legislation that's required and relevant to that activity. And really, all of this is resulting in a collective impact on the urban realm, causing clutter and disruption. So You know, we've all heard the spiel. 5G requires up to 100 times the amount of infrastructure as 4G, which may or may not be true depending on how long the hardware manufacturers take to give us our beautiful small 5G hardware. But it's also it's about the footpath print as well, where 5G requires not only something up on a pole or some other infrastructure, it also can require a footprint on the ground. That used to be a problem for the city of Melbourne because we had one of the fastest increasing populations in the Southern Hemisphere. Now we've got the opposite problem because of COVID-19. Before we had footpath crush, now, which means we need to have as much footpath as possible at all times. Now we've got the opposite problem where we won't have as many people, but they'll need, 5 times as much space as they did before. So having a clear footpath is really important. Having as much footpath as possible is really important too. And then the disruption that comes along with it. So the steps that we've really taken so far to engage on our 5G journey is, once we kind of worked out all these things that we just spoke to you about, at a high level, we engaged a 5G expert, and we actually engaged Jeff Hayden, who I believe presented at the last Masterclass, and he's really respected in the industry, independent consultant and vastly experienced across not only telecommunications connectivity, but what does it mean when it's connected to IoT? What does it mean when it's connected to data? We also investigated which telcos had purchased spectrum for our municipality so that we could understand all the players in the market and how much they had invested in terms of the spectrum that's been available through ACMA so far. We also did a deep dive on trying to understand what 5G infrastructure requirements were. So what electricity do they need? What fiber do they need? What do the macro cells look like? What do the small cells look like? What are the antennas? What does it mean if it's indoor versus outdoor versus underground? What do the small cells need in that urban realm when they're underneath the low impact definition? They're going to be 1.5 meters to 4 meters off the ground with fiber cabinets at times, which is what I talked about before with the footpath footprint. And we understand that they can actually be up to 5 kilometers away, is what we've heard around the traps, but usually they're just placed right beside the small cell because it's easier for the maintenance to be done. And, the other thing that we've done a lot of work on is understanding our key stakeholder expectations. What are the telecommunications companies' expectations? What are their experiences been so far? And we've also reviewed legislation. And so this is all the legislation that we've been able to find that's relevant to the City of Melbourne so far. And it all pretty much all comes back to the Telecommunications Act. And it really doesn't, the Telecommunications Act, if you haven't read the review of the Telecommunications Act, I would recommend reading it. Our recommendation in that act was that we need to, the Telecommunications Act doesn't really have any allowances of reference for the amount of infrastructure that's needed for 5G. So the low impact clause works, but it doesn't take into consideration the cumulative impact of everything of 5G when it reaches full maturity. And then we also completed a piece of work and reviewing the assets that we have in the municipality. So what of our existing assets is really suitable for telecommunications infrastructure to be attached to? Is there an offering that we can provide to the telecommunications company, or do we need to create new infrastructure? And some, for example, not our infrastructure, but a lot of light poles that City Power own are light poles that crush easily. So because if a car crashes into them, they need to be able to crush easily and not destroy the car and the person. But that means that they're not suitable for telecommunications infrastructure to be attached to. So really a big part of kind of getting traction, internal traction in this and getting our organisation to invest is to try and visualise the problem to solve. So we got some of our GIS designers to create a augmented reality model of what it might look like if we had uncoordinated, the 5G activity, where it's here we've got, every provider can put up things onto poles if they want to, if there's existing poles there. This is the worst case scenario with 4 providers not communicating and not co-locating, versus what about if we could get to some sort of utopian future where through coordination and collaboration with telecommunications companies and other infrastructure owners, we could get to a much more ideal and preferred future. And so through all of this work, what we've really, previous slide, what we've been able to do is, this is our vision for 5G and for telecommunications activity. It's connectivity without the clutter and minimizing disruption. So I kind of talked about the clutter on the footpath, and we've also, the clutter on the poles. So I'm not sure if it happens in many other municipalities, but for example, if you go to the corner of Flinders Street and Swanston Street in Melbourne, you can see that there is just, I think it's a saying from the team at AnyHub, post-apocalyptic Christmas trees. And I just love that saying because I just think it sums it up so well. And there's post-apocalyptic Christmas trees everywhere. And, this is our premier intersection. We've got a beautiful church on one side. We've got Federation Square on another. We've got Flinders Street on the other, and then we've got a heritage pub that's a tourist attraction on the other corner. Like, this is a beautiful intersection, but it's dispersed through with these post-apocalyptic Christmas trees. And what we really want to get to is we want to have connectivity, but without the clutter on the pole, but also at a ground level. And we want to minimize disruption at the same time. So currently at the moment, the Telecommunications Act, the Low Impact Clause, means that anytime a telecommunications company wants to change or maintain something on their on a small scale installation, they'll have to serve another notice. And so, and then that might require a traffic management plan, it might require digging. And so if, it could require a lot of disruption. And in the current processes and framework that we have for working with each other, if we just rely on the Telecommunications Act, it's a blunt instrument, and it's not necessarily super helpful for anyone who's in the city. And so through that whole process, and I think the thing here to point out is that we are putting so much effort and investment into this because we want it to happen with us, not to us. But also, we know, just as Paul pointed out before, that if we can have high levels of connectivity, the level of connectivity is directly related to your economic output. So we want to be a city with 5G. And so that's another reason why we kind of put in all this effort. But really, these are kind of our major insights so far on our 5G journey. Each telco really is at different levels of 5G maturity. Obviously, Telstra has the most mature footprint and has invested the most. So they're much further ahead than the other telecommunications companies. But that may change in the future. It's just that Telstra have the biggest footprint, which means that also it's different. There's different requirements to work with each telecommunications company. Connectivity is only as powerful as what it's connected to. So we do have 5G, but at the moment the use case is probably for the city, which again aren't necessarily, they're not as prominent or relevant at the moment due to the fact that we're in stage 4 lockdown, is the network capacity, management, being able to manage a lot of people on, so that your phone, you can use Netflix or Instagram at the train station, for example. But we're excited to see the more mature use cases come, especially as millimeter wave gets released. We don't know what we don't know. we're open to the fact we're learning. We learn something new every week or so about 5G and about what we need to do as a city. And so we're really open to the fact that we might need to pivot and add new requirements to the deployment, and that different partners have different priorities. So, you know, and that includes telecommunication partners, but also other major infrastructure owner partners. And at the moment, this kind of refers back to point 2. Most 5G use cases presented can be solved using 4G and other connectivity types at the moment. And you know, I think the biggest issue facing us, and Paul kind of alluded to this before, is that we need to really be able to work together a lot better to really realize the benefits of 5G. You know, for example, we could have an amazing traffic grid that was responsive and prioritize bike and pedestrian safety, but that requires a lot of collaboration from many different partners and stakeholders to realize, and it could be achieved. A lot of those use cases could be achieved with 4G. So I think it's really, we need to get our collaboration and, as Paul said, our ivory towers under control, so that we can realize a lot of the benefits of 5G connectivity. The other thing we really learned is, 2 years ago when we ran this design research sprint around 5G and what does it mean to the city of Melbourne, we're like, oh crap, we're really far behind. But actually, due to market maturity and due to my understanding of when the hardware is going to become available, we're not as far behind as we thought. And the rollout, as Jeff and Matt might have mentioned last week, the rollout of 5G is going to take 10 years. So there is actually a lot of time to plan. And a lot of these worst case scenarios that I'm talking about are really still quite far away and might not ever happen if we can work out a way to collaborate so that we get connectivity, but we get it without the clutter and without the disruption. And my 6th point really, and the 6th learning that we've got, is that there's really no magic solution for any of this. Different scenarios require different approaches. So, you know, we need completely different approaches to infrastructure, to connectivity type, to footprint, to design in a park compared to what we need on one of our really small streets or an alleyway compared to what we need on a major road. So there's lots of different requirements, and, you know, and also depends on the asset that we're attaching 5G to, and what will the use cases be for 5G in that area. What's the population? What's the tree coverage like? So there's no really one magic scenario that's going to solve 5G in terms of deployment. And it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of complexity to get to an ideal future. And the last point I wanted to make is kind of referring back to the test bed work, where we can kind of get ahead and test the next thing that's coming. We can start to explore some of these new ways of working in a really small environment before we roll it out to a municipality. We can explore different projects and different tech in that environment before going to a full-scale rollout. And so what's next for us, for the City of Melbourne? We've had a variety of success on getting internal traction on this, and COVID has definitely slowed things down. But at the moment, what we're really exploring, and I've kind of mentioned a bit of this in the previous slides, is we're exploring technical solutions for parks and open spaces. And how is that different from our street and footpath technical solutions, which are also exploring improvement for internal process. How can we make this a really great customer experience? Because at the moment, it's really not good enough. And if we want to be a city that enables 5G connectivity, enables telecommunication rollout, we need to have a much more efficient process in place to make that happen. We're also exploring new ways of working with telecommunication companies. Do we always have to just follow the Telecommunications Act and what's enshrined there about how we'll work with each other? And we're also exploring design standards for the municipality. Are are there some basic high-level design standards that don't specify, you know, to the millimeter perfect and the color and the shape, but are there some standards that we can agree upon and that we can agree upon with all of the telecommunication companies and the other major infrastructure owners? Is that something that's even possible? And how will we work with the other major asset owners to make that happen? And how would we best share information about telecommunications coverage in our municipality and data related to the activity of maintaining that and installing that in the first place? And that's me for now. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Tegan. That was a very interesting presentation. A couple of things, you know, I was already a couple of years ago, I heard from one of your colleagues, you know, what the biggest problem in Melbourne is our footpath. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, gee, I thought, my God, you know, that I've never thought about that. But yeah, if you are such a growing city and you get so many people in town and you actually want people in town, then obviously, you know, that's something that that is of concern.
Yeah.
I also very much liked your emphasis on collaboration, and collaboration. I think in numerous ways you need collaboration between the city, the state, and the federal, because one of the problems that cities have, they don't have enough money. Yeah, so that's totally controlled by the state and the federal. So you know that's a major issue in going forward. Then obviously, you know, between the city, the businesses, and suppliers such as Telstra, and on the other side, universities. I know that several of your universities are really involved in that, and that's really, really good to see. And then, very importantly, with the citizens. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I've learned over all those years that if a city doesn't have the structure in place and the strategy in place, it's useless to start talking to your citizens. You need to have a platform, yeah, that allows you in an intellectual way, in a good way, to actually start talking to your citizens, and not you know, the citizens are just flooding you with all sorts of things. It needs to be structured, and cities like yourself, as Melbourne, you know, have reached that level, and it's really good to see that happening. So congratulations to Melbourne, Tegan, for fantastic work. And last but not least, totally agreed, also internationally, yeah. Cities like Melbourne are right at the top. Yeah, it's not that we as Australia or cities in Australia are running behind. No, you know, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Barcelona, all do good things, but none of them, you know, can say we are the best, we are the top. Yeah. We're all learning from each other in that respect. Yeah. Thank you for that. Before I hand over to you, Simon, I just want to mention to the delegates that on the chat, you can also add your questions, because after the break, we will do the questions. And unfortunately, the way it works is that if you are the first on the chat, then you also are the first one to get, we open you up for the talk on the conference. So if there are lots of you, then unfortunately, if you're very late in bringing your question forwards, then we might just run out of time. So please, if you want to start thinking about it in the break, and make sure that you put your questions on the list. Simon, now over to you. Please let us know what sort of exciting things are happening in your part of the world.
Great. Well, thanks, Paul. I trust you can see my slides on the screen there.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about Telstra's, both their journey to 5G, where we are at the moment, and where we're going into the future. And it's probably fair to say that, as Tegan pointed out, we're pretty, well, we're down the road with our 5G journey. We've already made extensive deployments across Australia. So I thought initially we'll just touch on where we are with our 5G deployment today, and then I'll cover a few other topics. So as of today, our 5G coverage in fact covers selected areas in 53 cities and regional towns across Australia. So we're not just deployed 5G in the capital cities or the CBDs, we're actually deployed quite extensive coverage in the suburban areas, as well as a number of regional centres. So to get that coverage out there, in fact, we have over 1,500 sites that are 5G enabled. So we've actually had to go to 1,500 sites and upgrade them. So it's been quite an extensive effort that has occurred over almost the last 2 years, and quite a significant capital investment as well. That if you depending on how you look at the coverage, obviously 1,000 suburbs have at least 50% coverage, and that comprises actually 10 million people will transit through that 5G coverage and potentially could make use of it. I believe we have over 200,000 devices already on the network today that are capable of using that. And we have announced that we intend to extend our coverage to 75% of the population coverage by the middle of next year. So there has been some significant investment. In fact, we've even brought forward some of our capital investment into roll out 5G that's been announced recently. In addition to that, there's been somewhat of a focus also of rolling that coverage out in suburban areas, because with the current environment we are in, that's where most people are rather than the cities. But no doubt we're still focusing very much on that CBDs as well, because that's where a lot of the benefit 5G can be given in the future. Just to go back a little bit of where we are with the 5G as the technology itself, and sort of let's see Telstra's perspective on it. This is the, if you like, there's 3 main directions that 5G has taken. They're not the only benefits of 5G, but they are shown out on this diagram. Really where most of the focus at the moment is this enhanced mobile broadband. Massive Internet of Things, I'll talk about that where we have quite a bit of capability today. And the mission critical part is really where we probably see emerging use cases over the next, let's say 4 or 5 years and beyond. So on the mobile broadband front, and this is really when we talk about the stages of 5G, and that we are at early days, given that this technology is something that is going to roll out over the next 10 years and beyond, this is where we're initially seeing some of the benefits. And a lot of them are it's really about transporting a lot of data. And the demands on our network for transporting data are in fact increasing. And whilst we might say that 4G can use, these use cases may be delivered on 4G, that may be true, but we get issues where we might run out of capacity on 4G. So adding 5G is important for that capacity part. And that's really important because we want to have lots of things that are connected. One of, as an example use case that we do can see that capacity being used is very much in video. And being video, it's more than just high definition streaming on your smartphone. On the right here is one of the projects we undertook where we did manage to connect a camera, a high definition camera, with mobile connectivity. Quite simple, we could just put it on a pole and plug it into power. And this is actually running some analytics off the camera where it will detect a pedestrian crossing a intersection. And in real time, we're actually sending alerts to this vehicle here in the foreground. And so that whole interaction can happen in under a second, and all that because the camera can be connected with mobile connectivity, and it makes it much easier to put in cameras when we can connect them wirelessly. So that's an example of where we see more of that. If we have to transport more video in an environment like this, we're going to need more capacity, and therefore 5G helps us there. So that mobile broadband part, or at least we should say it's a wireless broadband part, is a pretty important part for us. Some of the other use cases I've listed there as well. The second part that often gets talked about is the really reliable and low latency communications. This is not really something that we have in place today, and is something that we can look to seeing happening in the future. And it's probably fair to say that in most cases, this is not an area that has wireless connectivity today. So if you think of for example, a factory that might have a whole lot of sensors operating and detecting some form of production line that's moving very, very quickly. That needs to be incredibly reliable. That sensor can't afford to have a message disappear, and it can't be retransmitted because it's very time sensitive. So it has to be very low latency for then some other part of the factory to take an immediate reaction. So this really high reliability, low latency communications is something we're probably likely to see in the later half of the decade. But it is an area that has quite a bit of potential. The third area that that we're focused on is this massive Internet of Things connectivity, where we're trying to connect large quantity of devices. So lots of sensors, thousands of them in perhaps or millions in a rather small geographic area. So the throughput on each device is not so important. They're usually rather small pieces of information that need to be transported, and in most cases they're not necessarily very time sensitive either. So if there's a bit of delay, the latency, it doesn't matter so much. Now, this area is something that has been talked about quite a bit over the last, let's say, five to 10 years. And in fact, we've done quite a bit to enable this technology already. So one of the technologies that Telstra has rolled out across its network is both a CAT-M, CAT-M1 capable network, and also narrowband IoT network. And this enables a different device subset. So it's not a high-end device like a high-end 4G device, actually a very low-end device, rather inexpensive, consumes very little power, so it can operate on battery for several years. And Telstra's narrowband IoT coverage actually covers 4 million square kilometres today across Australia. That coverage actually exceeds the voice coverage of our mobile network. So it is very extensive, and we can do that by in fact trading off some of those latency and throughput for extra coverage. One point I'd make around the IoT coverage on our network is that the narrowband IoT technology, if you like, has really only been around about 4 or 5 years. So it's quite a new technology compared to the rest of 4G. And because of that, it's been designed in such a way that has a much longevity, so that narrowband IoT technology will actually fit in to 5G technology, or works very much alongside it. We don't see a case necessarily of this technology having some inadequacies or necessarily needing huge amounts of extra capacity enhancements on it. We can actually take this technology and have it as part of 5G going forward. So that's probably something to just keep in mind, is that if you are looking at IoT, you probably don't need to be too concerned about this technology. Well, look, there's a 5G IoT technology coming around the corner, I should wait for that. We see actually this technology being the main technology that is deployed for IoT connectivity for some period to come. So with that, we are already down the path of 5G. So I'd also talk a little bit about how we got to the stage we are at the moment. Because whilst 5G is new, it's not necessarily something that is particularly new to Telstra. From my experience, when I first joined Telstra about 5 years ago, one of the first tasks given to me was, in fact, can you please write some material for the board, because we saw 5G as something that's really was starting to become quite active. So it all really started, I suppose, in the early half of the last decade, around 2014, 2015, where a lot of the industry bodies started to put together their requirements of what they wanted to see out of 5G. And those comprised of the bodies like NGMN, GSMA, there's some other industry bodies. And then along with the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, came up with a specification called IMT 2020, which really outlined a target for the technology. So it specified things like the bit rates that we'd want from a technology, or the peak bit rates, or the amount of capacity in an area, both taking into account the mobile broadband side, connecting lots of things, and also some of the latency and reliability requirements. 3GPP is in fact the standardization body that started to put together specifications so that all the technology that was put together can communicate with one another. So, your smartphones can communicate with your networks and so forth, and that's a really important part. And release 15 was released in around 2016. And so that enabled us to start consuming technology based on those standards. Probably the other thing to say is that 5G is really could probably be seen as more of a collection of technologies, although most of the focus today is talking about a rather specific radio technology called New Radio, or NR. But we're going to see a lot of other technologies come as part of 5G, which I'll touch on a little bit later. So that's where we sort of start. There's a lot of talk, if you like. There wasn't a lot of action in terms of actual seeing the technology. Then we got to the point in 2016 where we first conducted our a trial, or a proof of concept, if you like, of 5G technology. And one of the main things we saw in 5G technology was these antennas, these very, very smart antennas that could make very efficient use of the frequency spectrum. And it does that by these technology called beamforming, which allows it to concentrate the energy from an antenna in a particular area of a cell. So rather than a traditional antenna, which sort of sends out the signals in all directions, with a rather even distribution, and this technology can actually use multiple antenna elements to channel the technology in a certain area. So what in this case you can see is inside this van, which is driving around the car park, is one of the very early 5G devices. In fact, it probably weighs about 200 kilograms and is about half a rack. So it's a very large device compared to what we might have today. And what is overlaid on there is the video, which some smart people have managed to put a dot, the green dot, on top of the beam that is currently active on that antenna as in real time as that vehicle moves around. So really the effect of this is that whilst we could actually have one device over here consuming that power, we could also have a second device in a different part of the cell also doing it. So we can actually serve two devices with the same amount of capacity. So that's really where some of this or multiple devices for that matter. So there's some of the beamforming technology can make very efficient use of spectrum and therefore provide that new capacity. And that's really the first part of 5G that we aimed to test back in 2016. We then moved along a bit further, and of course it's great to have good technology, but we do also need those use cases and looking at how can various use cases benefit from the technology. So we had benefited from the we put together a 5G innovation centre on the Gold Coast in Southport initially, where we could test some of these use cases. You can see here the actual device, if you like, got quite a bit smaller, so it's about the size of a large desktop PC now. And one of the use cases that we could test is this 5G gaming, or gaming. So we know gaming is a very popular recreational activity that people do, and in that case it has quite high demands on latency and also throughput. So whilst we couldn't actually have 5G devices in each of the laptops or PCs, we could actually route all that data from the gaming through 5G devices to see how the games would behave. Similarly, whilst we didn't have 5G smartphones or consumer devices that could take advantage of the 5G technology, we were still able to start testing it by connecting a whole lot of Wi-Fi access points in the public and route that traffic through a 5G link. So again, we could start to see the way applications would behave across the 5G technology and how much we could get through, what type of latency there was, and so forth. So the key here is we don't necessarily need all the technology bits and pieces to be in place before we can start testing it. And so you might like to think about that if you're running a project. We can't necessarily wait for everything to be in place before we start testing things. Now, after this, we managed to get a commercial network, and we started to get the very products from vendors that we were able to put into our network. And in fact, we were able to launch that network in 2018. And in fact, we built out a lot of the network well before there were commercial devices available. So that was quite good. And when the commercial devices were available, they could immediately take advantage of that 5G coverage where it existed. And so we're almost 2 years into that period of building out the network, with a particular focus in the build of around the last year. And I've said we've actually have over 1,500 sites that are active today in our network. And these are some tests. Both you can see Telstra and Optus's results in there. And what we're seeing, if you look at the full report here, is that we do see a significant uplift in speeds that are available both the average and the peak when you compare the 4G, just 4G only technology, and then you add in 5G. Now, whilst peak's important, it is representative of overall capacity as well. So if the average is going up, generally we also can provide more capacity overall. So that's something to always remember, that 5G is about also adding capacity today, as well as serving those new use cases that are coming. And you also see the 5G coverage map as we've got today. So that's specifically 5G. Now, obviously, we operate 4G as well, and those two technologies work very, very closely together. And we have deployed that 5G both in the CBD areas, but also out in the suburban areas and also in regional centres as well. So in this case, you can see quite extensive coverage in both Geelong and Ballarat. One thing we talked a little bit about clutter, and I think you might have seen a large tower previously that did have quite a lot on it, and unfortunately, that's in some cases that's the least we can get away with while serving our customers. But on this one, you can see an indoor system, and if you probably have a look very carefully, you can see a disc here, and that is in fact one of the 5G antennas that we can deploy in a building. So you can see it's not a big, great, ugly antenna that's there. It doesn't require a huge amount of infrastructure, and we're probably more likely to see more and more of those type of form factors as we get smaller cells in the future that can actually serve a fair amount of capacity from a little radio head like that. So in that case, that radio head actually has 4 antennas inbuilt into it. It's slightly not quite as the amount of capacity as the large one you saw previously, which might have 64 antenna elements, but nevertheless, it is something that's existing where we are seeing form factors that are much less clutter. And so I thought I'll leave this one. I think you can sort of read through sort of our journey to where we are today from our first initial trial on this pack. I think the slides will be sent around after the session. So really looking at where we are going to next with the technology. So really today, a lot of the enhancements for 5G have been around the technology of beamforming and multi-user MIMO. And again, that's really focused at that mobile broadband, adding lots of capacity and using a lot of smart antennas. The next where we're going to is probably looking at this one, which is around adding capacity in terms of very large carrier bandwidths. So that is some of the millimeter wave technology allows us to have lots of capacity. But as you might be aware, millimeter wave is a much higher frequency than we operate today. And therefore it has the propagation characteristics and nothing like what we have. So in general, you have to be rather close to an antenna and almost be able to see it to be able to use it. And also, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a problem. There are lots of use cases we would see where that might be quite beneficial. So if you could imagine a very large stadium where you've got a very large population density, or for example, even CBDs where you've got lots of things that need connecting in a small area, and have quite high throughput requirements, that's quite a good technology. And we're also able to deploy this millimeter wave technology indoor down the track as well to connect things like those very, very smart factories and so forth. But one thing I haven't put on here that we are doing is also deploying 5G into low band technology. So the 5G we have today is operating what we call mid-band technology at 3.5 gigahertz. The millimeter wave is operating up at 26 gigahertz. But we're also trying to get 5G in under 1 gigahertz to really get that coverage. Now, whilst we get the coverage, we don't necessarily extract a huge amount of more capacity out of the spectrum than we do today. But what deploying 5G with coverage is allows us to deploy some of these other parts of technology, which is really linked to a 5G core. And you might also hear of a technology term called 5G standalone. And that really makes us, really allows us to get some of the benefits of 5G around automatically being able to build networks. There's a lot of benefits from a network operator in using, the network really becomes a much more software-oriented network, and it's much more similar to perhaps other types of technologies you might see in the IT domain. So it's very good for an operator to have those that way of building networks. We've also, it was mentioned on the previous session last week around the network being more distributed. So the 5G core allows us to build down the track a much more distributed network to get those extremely low latencies, or there might be some particular requirements that require it not just be so centralized as it might be today. And also the other part is this network slicing. So this is really where we see the ability for us to build networks that are a bit more isolated from one another, and that might be meeting a particular customer's requirements. So it really gives us a far more way of flexibly building a network in the future. So with all these bits and pieces, we intend to serve a lot more use cases than we can today. And the other thing I would say around this is these technologies are really quite complicated. They're not actually that straightforward to deploy. Whilst we are trying to make them simpler to deploy, there's a lot of moving parts, as you can see even on this screen. So fortunately with Telstra, we're in a great position of having some very, very good engineering expertise within Australia. And we think our engineering expertise in Australia is some of the best in the world. So we're certainly believe we're world leaders when it comes to deploying these 5G technologies. So with that, I think I'll draw my presentation to a close, and I'll be very happy to answer the questions when we get to that session.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was very comprehensive, and it gives a good idea of the capabilities and the possibilities of 5G, but also the choices that you guys and the cities and others will have to make, how it, because I understand it depends very much. There are different ways of how you can deploy it, yeah, and that makes it on one side fascinating, on the other side complex, of course, yeah. So it's interesting to see that happening. So thank you very much. All right, we now have a 10-minute break, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much, Tegan, and thank you very much, Simon. But you guys will be back shortly when we get the questions. And I thought the first questions are already rolling in, so will be interesting next session. So see you in 10 minutes. Just checking if you guys are coming back to the session.
Yes.
I know I'm a little bit early, so I'll give you another 30 seconds, delegates, to get your coffees or glass of water, and then we will start. And just in case, Maria Markham, you will be the first person to ask a question, and then perhaps David Jones want to follow that up because he had an related question as well. But first, Maria, are you there? Please unmute yourself, and then we would like to hear your question.
Hello, yes, I'm here.
I can see you, Maria. Now, can we hear you?
Hello, wonderful.
You have to unmute yourself. I think you're still muted.
I can hear Maria.
Can
Very
you hear me?
faint, very faint.
Let me increase the volume. How about now? Yes?
Okay, they can hear you, yes?
Yes.
Now, what I would like to do, because this is an interesting question, I would like to ask Tegan to respond to that from a, call it a citizen's perspective, yeah? You know, doesn't really matter if the problem is real or not real. Cities will have to deal with it, and then obviously Simon can come back with to look at this more from the technical point of view. So perhaps Tegan, if you want to start with your answer on that.
What's the question, sorry?
So what are the health implications of 5G technologies for living organisms? And I can expand if you wish, but I'm sure you heard this question a number of times.
Sure. Well, we're pretty confident at the City of Melbourne that the Australian federal government and our PANZA know what they're doing. They work with the World Health Organization on the standards for radiation. So we're pretty comfortable with where the science is at the moment. There's a really good, you know, if you look at a 5G wave compared to like a sunbeam, it's a lot less it's a lot less damaging to your system. There's no damage to be found compared to just being out in the sun. So when we get this question from customers, from citizens in the community, we refer them to the really great resources at ACMA, and we say, you know, we defer to our PANZA's expertise, and that every telecommunication company needs to follow the Telecommunication Act, which sets out how they will conduct themselves, and we're really confident in that process. And that's usually what we say, and we don't really go into it too much because we're comfortable and confident with the science behind it.
Yeah. Well, really the concern is that we're going to have more and more the spots with 5G antennas, and then we'll inevitably end up being under those beams all the time.
Yeah.
So that's why it's concerned. It's not about you go out of the sun and then you go inside and you're not exposed to that. Whereas with 5G, it will be everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, perhaps
Simon, perhaps the scientific
can.
Yeah, well, look, I'll just say I'm not a scientist, but I mean, look, it is a fair question to ask, and it's very important to Telstra as well. It's in our business interest to make sure that that any electromagnetic energy is safe. One thing is probably important to point out is that 5G itself, most of it is still just radio waves that are being modulated. In fact, from that point of view of how it affects living organisms, it's no different to the effects of things like 4G or 3G or 2G or AM radio, FM radio, TV. They're all electromagnetic energy. And of course, the regulator in this space, well, well, there's a couple of regulations, but ARPANSA is the Australian space for the radio, what is acceptable for radiation. And we should point out that there is, if you like, a limit where we say, you know, we must be below a certain level for health. And then we actually have the regulation, which is well below that. And in fact, the amount of energy that is measured from 5G, as well as 4G and all those other technologies, is well below the actual regulated limit, which is actually below the health limits. So it is something that's is an important question to ask, and it's something that's very important we get right as well. So you know, we do have a fair bit of expertise even within Telstra looking at this. We do have scientists employed by Telstra who have significant research experience, and it is a domain, electromagnetic energy, that has been studied quite extensively over a long period of time. So there is a lot of knowledge already around the effects of this energy on living organisms, and of course we believe that you know, it's quite safe for 5G technology.
Thank you, Simon. And in the meantime, Mark has put a document on the chat that provides some information on health as well. And I also know, Maria, that Telstra and the other service providers have asked the government to also come up with better communication on the issue, because sometimes, you know, the telcos are seen as biased. The government, of course, has a national health obligation, and there are documents also provided by the government, and that will increase over the years as well, to highlight the issue. But as an independent consultant in this market, I tend to agree with the speakers and with the regulators and with the World Health Organization. You know, that the level of danger is extremely low. I mean, unless you glue your phone against your head and stay with that all the time, you would have a problem. But otherwise, you know, if you are a sensible person and you use your headphones and all that sort of stuff, you know, then the telcos are doing their, you know, they have to do under the legislation, otherwise they get fined. So there's no, you know, why would they misuse it? So I think while it's a very important issue, it's not going away, and people, you know, some people will never ever be, we will never be able to convince them. But you know, the reality is that all the experts, all the independent healthcare experts, not the telecommunication people, the healthcare experts, doctors, etc., you know, the reputable ones, they all indicate that it's safe. So, and I think the other thing is, if you look at it, I think there are many more lives saved by people having a mobile phone than if that would not be the case. If you go to Africa and you see, you know, how the telehealth service is operating there with SMS and things like that, it saves daily hundreds of lives. So, you know, I think there's a very positive element to it. And the other thing, we need to control it, but I think it's safe. David, did you want to add something to that, David Jones?
Yeah, my question, as it turned out, was different to Maria's. I only briefly read it when I saw it in chat beforehand. It really is a different question. There's some discussion today on radio about a device where people who live alone can be monitored and they have to speak at least 50 words a day, and if not, they get contacted. And it seems to me that the IoT technologies could play a significant role with aged care at home. Now, we've seen the debacle of aged care in commercial aged care places of late. I need to say no more. And given the population will be ageing over the next few decades, there probably is a big role to be played by developing devices that can quite actively monitor aged people in their homes in real time. You know, watching out for falling, watching out for activities, maybe monitoring their body for various things. And you know, 5G with the bandwidth and so forth could well play a big role in it. So more of a statement than a question.
Yeah,
But,
perhaps Simon. Simon, do you want
Yeah,
to add
no, look,
something to this?
I was going to say absolutely. I mean, health is a really area that's a lot of potential to improve and like real improvements in people's lives. And so, as you say, some of the thing, and even the team I'm in is looking at some of those use cases where there's the high bandwidth applications of video, being able to detect things, or at least audio, not necessarily in a creepy way, but actually in a real positive way. And the other deals are really the IoT devices, which are where you can wear something around your neck and it's got a SIM card in it, so you don't have to worry about connecting to the phone. It just works and can detect falls and so forth and alert people. So that's this looks some real benefits. And of course, this is I just want to make clear, it's not a case of saying, well, this is trading off health benefits that might health issues with 5G. They're both positives. The 5G is safe, and there's the benefits of the actual technologies in the health area.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. There was an article on the television recently, or perhaps even a year or 2 years ago, where these issues were the technology issues were discussed with some elderly people who didn't have a lot of understanding of the technology, but they were saying, there was a whole discussion about privacy, and things like that. You can hear me, or you can see me, or you can whatever. Yeah. And there was this lady, in her 90s, and she says, listen, put a video camera in my shower, because if I fall, it will happen over there. And I don't give a damn, people need to help me then, yeah? So I think that a lot of people, are understanding the advantages of having these new technology. And what you just mentioned, David, I think is another great new development that we can use to make things safer. And it's not just safer, it's also that facility that people can stay longer at home. Most people like to stay at home. They don't want to go to old age care centers. So, it really helps the lifestyle issues that I think technology can be so positive about. So thank you very much for your question, David. Vijal Shoksi, are you there? Can you ask your question?
Hi, Paul, Tegan, Simon, great, really good session so far. I had more a question around, obviously, Simon, you touched on some of the use cases around 5G and some of the, it's a complex, like you said, complementing technologies. I'm really curious to hear, now that with more and more virtualization and cloud technologies, right? So how does that influence some of the use cases? And we know that obviously large organizations like Telstra, Optus, Vodafone, etc., has huge capital expense on their assets. How did they make that shift from where you are currently to where you want to go? Really keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I guess respond to that on that. Yeah, look, I just reading your question as well. I mean, that area of virtualization and I should say the cloud technology are making a big difference into the way we build networks, and we can start to think of networks as not these big hardware appliances that we used to have to deploy, but much more like a software function. So they're easier to upgrade. We can get capability pushed out into our network far more easily. We can make those networks far more flexible. So network slicing relies very much on that sort of everything is software, and obviously virtualization is the key to be able to do that. So you can literally one day, let's say we go to a web page, I want a new network in this area and I want it to go to this place, and click and boom, it's all done. That's the vision of some of that automation orchestration, and then that allows you to do new use cases. So if a particular enterprise or government wishes to have that capability, they can almost self-serve, and that's that's very much a vision. You don't have to go and talk to Telstra person or anything, but that is really underpinned by those virtualization and cloud technologies. And yeah, obviously you sort of mentioned about sort of the the wanted state around that. I mean, we still have to see how it plays out here. I mean, do telcos operate the infrastructure, or do other parties, and who operates what? I think that's still going to be, there's so many moving parts there. We probably don't really know how it's going to play out. But I think telcos ultimately are still going to have, if you like, the not poles and wires, but they're still going to have that infrastructure, because that is really where the operators have a lot of expertise in managing thousands of sites that perhaps other parties, well, councils might, but certainly some of the cloud providers today don't necessarily have the the expertise in managing 10,000 sites across Australia. So.
And just a question, Simon, on that. So Tegan, you mentioned about some of the experience layers that you want to deliver as well, right? You mentioned about footpath and parks.
Mm-hmm.
Are the sort of use cases where you are also tapping into what 5G has to provide, with really taking that experience layer at a focal point?
Yes, I think what you're trying to ask is, the focus on the experience is the main thing, obviously. But I think also especially when you're thinking about any type of new deployment, again, because of the Telecommunications Act, councils have a lot more influence inside of open spaces and parks compared to the footpaths and roads. But it's also, whenever you're putting in new infrastructure into those spaces, it's an opportunity to open up your use cases and to put in sensing, other types of equipment into those locations as well. So that's where a smart pole, for example, or smart infrastructure would come in very handy. And especially then in a parks situation where you would want to be reducing your infrastructure, not increasing your infrastructure. You can encourage co-location. You encourage a much more packaged up experience, visually, aesthetically, but also in terms of minimizing the amount of disruption. You can add in lots of different capabilities at once, not just connectivity. Yeah.
Interesting. I really think I can't stress that enough, Tegan, that cities need to take that leadership role in that. It's so important, that cities understand what this is all about. It's very difficult for cities. I understand that, that they are not technology savage as a Telstra or an Optus or a Cisco is. That's impossible. But on a strategic level, cities will have to really start to understand, what this is all about, and that's one of my worries, that it's not happening. I was talking to the lady that's in charge of the Council of Lord Mayors, and the responsibility that the big cities have in their learning process to actually also pass that learning on to the next level of towns, etc. I think it's really important.
I'm hoping that the experiences that we have, and if we get to some solid outcomes, that we'll just be able to share and replicate and scale, and a lot of other municipalities and cities can leapfrog all of the mistakes or dead ends that we've had to go down on our 5G journey, so that they can just have a much more smooth implementation process. Yeah,
the good thing, Tegan, is that while it's very difficult for telcos to work together, cities can very easily work together. That's a good thing. Yeah. I also, listening to Simon's answer on Vishal's question, I know that Ian Opperman joined the conference as well, and I'm sure that Ian next week will have something to say about the future of these technologies and the challenges of that. So, Ian, you're put on notice already with this question that Vishal just asked. I now would like to ask Michael Riley. Michael, are you there? And you had a good question last week, so I'm looking forward to the next question. Michael?
Hello, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
First of all, thank you to Simon and Tegan for sharing your insights, and you have my question in front of you, but just to give you a little more context, We know that street poles will be very important, not exclusively, but very important to the rollout of 5G. And they represent the location for small cells and also the point of intersection with fibre networks. Now, whether you're a council looking at existing communities or you're a developer building new communities, you really care about the cost of infrastructure. Last Wednesday, we learned there's no general rules of thumb, but if you wanted to have a stab in the dark, you should have a small cell every 100 metres. We know street poles are roughly spaced every 25 to 30 metres, which means in an ideal world, you'd only have one 5G small cell on every third or fourth street pole. It was also pointed out last Wednesday that if every major wireless carrier in Australia wanted their own 5G small cell and their own street pole, you'd have to have every street pole in a development or a community upgraded to be a smart street pole. Now, there's substantial additional costs with doing that, not only in the pole itself, but also the pit and pipe network, the civil works, the ripping up roads, the disruption to businesses, the additional fibre costs. There's just lots and lots of extra infrastructure costs. Now, we know in the US, they've really disaggregated the value chain of wireless communications, and most of the major wireless carriers over there don't care about owning infrastructure. They are very willing to share infrastructure. And I believe there's some work going on in developing 5G small cells, which will be shared amongst wireless carriers. In Australia, we haven't had that history of disaggregation or cooperation between wireless carriers, and I can understand that. That's not a criticism. But if you really want to make councils and developers happy in the future, Simon, Telstra as an organisation really needs to start looking at collaboration. And my question to you ultimately is, do you envisage a scenario where you will share 5G small cells in Tegan's council and in new developments?
Well, look, I mean, thanks for the question. I mean, it's a really good one to have, and it is very challenging even for us managing our infrastructure and the amount that we have to put in. I mean, the first thing I'd say is that we do actually work with other operators to build radio sites today. Okay, so that it's not the case that there's no cooperation at all. Particularly, for example, in building systems, a case where typically one operator will build that infrastructure and then the other operators will use it. And you've got cases like the City Loop coverage that exists in the rail loop in Melbourne, for example. That's a shared system as well, where all the operators use it. So it's not without precedent that it is happening today in some environments. I think you're then talking about perhaps 5G small cells in the city. I mean, Telstra already operates a small cell network in Melbourne today, but you can see perhaps a case where there are capacity demands and some of this millimetre wave with the propagation characteristics that it does when you start extrapolating that out and looking at all the operators, that there is maybe a concern about the amount of street furniture. So I think we're well aware of it. It's not a case of saying, yes, we'll do it, because a part of it is, in fact, we also need the technology to be able to do it as well. And that's actually a bit more involved than it might seem. And in fact, some of the issues that you might face, even from a technology lens, I'm more of a technologist, is that even going to 5G has actually made these antennas more complex, which has actually made it more challenging to share compared to perhaps a standard sort of antenna system. So we're well aware of the challenges. As I say, we do actually share infrastructure in some cases already today, and we'll see how it plays out. But that may well occur, happen anyway, because it has to be economic to roll these things out as well. And if you can sort of pool assets where it makes sense, then we may well see that. But then again, we also need to, as Telstra, we're trying to want to make our network consistent as well, and consistency is really important. And one thing about Telstra being able to launch some of the network features quite aggressively in this market and be a world leader, and we need to be, because we're not a big country on the world stage, but we want to deploy the latest technology, is that we've basically got that consistency where we do control a lot of the infrastructure ourselves, and we control the software, and we can deploy it with some consistency so that those applications work, and that then benefits the applications. So it is very much a to try and balance those two going forward.
Thank you.
In addition to that, Simon, obviously we've got the difference between passive and active infrastructure, yeah. And so if listening to your presentation, then the whole thing is moving far more to a software-based environment. So on one side you could say that the passive infrastructure is not that important anymore in relation to what sort of services you want to deploy and the quality that you want to maintain and things like that as a company. So if the service is going more towards software, and that would then, in my opinion, make it easier to share passive infrastructure. Am I on the wrong track, or is that?
No, I think you're quite right, and we are seeing some some developments globally around trying to make that much more software. I mean, I'm not sure necessarily all that technology exists today. With software, there's always a thing you can do anything, right? So, we have to be able to see that technology in the market to be able to consume it as well. So when we start to get down to that, sharing those active parts, it is much more challenging.
Yeah.
So, but it is happening. It is happening, and the hope is that in the future it will be easier to share the infrastructure. And we also, obviously, Telstra itself doesn't manufacture radio components and so forth as well. So trying to get all the combinations of frequency bands and all that aligned across multiple operators is actually quite challenging when you get to active equipment.
Yeah. No, I can see that. But at the same time, it's also what you mentioned. It also makes economic sense, to start looking at issues like that. And then I think you will get more and more pressure from cities, for example. And not the cities, not people necessarily like Tegan, but the citizens, who are going to say, hey guys, get your act together, And so I think that you're right, and you're alluding to that we can expect, further developments in this area going forward, Tegan, a question for you. I was talking to the City of Adelaide and Newcastle recently, and they said, thanks to COVID, the decision-making processes in our council have been speeded up. We had a number of projects in the smart city environment that were on the shelf, and now suddenly the bosses are asking, let's implement them. Do you see a change in decision-making processes in councils, which can be very bureaucratic and very, takes a long time? Did you see a change because of the COVID, that there is more urgency behind some of the things?
I think we've seen a change in cultural understanding and organizational understanding of the importance of having a digital workforce and the importance of being able to remotely collect data, which is exciting. With moving 1,500 people into an online remote workforce has been amazing for our collaboration and for just speeding that up, speeding that along, which has been great. In terms of decision making, we've actually been approached by a lot more other councils around Australia who want to understand more about the smart city projects that we have going on. So, for example, our pedestrian network data has been featured and been used by a lot of different news outlets, because it's all open data, it's all real time, available to anyone who wants to access it to report on activity through the urban realm. I'd say because of COVID, it's now much more apparent and relevant that we do need data and remote understanding about what's happening in the urban realm to reduce the risk to employees out out there in the municipality, but also to remotely understand things and understand trends as it relates to COVID and as it relates to stage 4. And having that robust data collection has been really great and supportive in terms of the pace of things. I actually think it's probably just about the same, I'd say.
Right. Yeah.
It's probably, it's some of the things that we need to do in person have slowed down because we're not able to leave our houses. When checking on IoT projects or getting something up and running, it's become a bit slower because it's harder to have those face-to-face conversations and harder to get everything going. But overall, I'd say it's about the same. But the business case and the use case for smart city initiatives has become even more clear, I think, to all of our stakeholders. Yeah. We're going to have to, we won't have to fight as hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's a clear focus now on this digital transformation, and that you see that as employees, as staff, but then, that obviously has then a much broader application, across the community.
And I think, the importance of real-time data and understanding what's happening in the urban realm has become really clear. Yeah.
Has COVID an impact on Telstra in that respect, Simon, in relation to more awareness of digital technologies and the need for it, demand for it?
Yes, certainly. I mean, it's the entire Telstra workforce, I think, packed up and started working from home at the beginning of March, and probably the first large company to do that. So, 25,000 people overnight working from home. So, it affects us in a day-to-day work. But we've seen, obviously, the different traffic profiles in networkers too, and demand for those services. So it's made a big difference to the networks. I mean, networks I think have held up fairly well overall, but yeah, certainly.
Do you get other companies, cities, others to say, hey, we now need to think far more digital. Telstra, help us.
Yes, I believe so. I mean, it's not an area that I'm necessarily intimately involved with, but obviously Telstra offers a lot more services in that space. So obviously connectivity is one space. Telstra's probably that's the main part of the Telstra business, but also all those collaboration tools and telephony tools and so forth. That is something, and that's something that enterprises have had to adapt to very quickly. So in some cases they will have come to Telstra to do that.
Another question for you both is, we've talked about 5G. We, of course, have the NBN, the fixed network. We've got these other IoT systems, and I think Telstra has its own IoT system as well. How does it all come together and fit together? One thing I've heard is that 5G actually becomes just a wireless access point on a fiber network. So the importance of fiber for 5G is becoming more and more important. Yeah. On the other side, we've heard that 5G might just be too expensive for a lot of sensor-based technologies, and the cheaper other IoT technologies might be more appropriate for that. So, Tegan, have you looked as a city? Have you looked at the various technologies, and do you have an idea? Do they fit together, or are they complementary? Or give us a bit of insight on how Melbourne has looked at that.
Sure. Well, we did a bunch of work measuring our maturity a couple of years ago, and we like to think about it in 5 layers, and we call it the digital urban infrastructure framework. We're just making up jargon as we go along because we love to do that for a council. And so there's 5 layers and it kind of having a common language across our maturity helps us to kind of grow and understand. And so the first layer is the infrastructure layer, so the space, the physical space where sensors and IoT and connectivity hardware will happen. Then there's the hardware devices and sensors themselves. And then the third layer is the connectivity layer, so all the different connectivity types, including 5G, 4G, LoRaWAN, etc. And then we've got the fourth layer, which is the data integration layer. So how does that data, once it's sent, how does it get stored, standardized, etc. And then we have the interface layer, which is how does it get communicated outwards. And so we try to think about our maturity across those things. I think in terms of connectivity, sorry, I live just right near a train line, so I'm sorry if that train's really loud. In terms of connectivity, I think it depends on the location for us, because in the city we have the huge buildings, which means the signals can be really unreliable, and where it's not always appropriate for some types of signals to be used. So it's really about what's fit for purpose. I think 5G is just another connectivity layer. As I said before, I think we haven't really seen what millimeter waves capable of doing it, because we don't have it in the market. But once we have that, I think it's kind of like we don't know what we don't know, the edge compute scenario so far. But I think for smart city uses, it just depends on what's fit for purpose.
My understanding is that you also do employ other IoT networks within the city.
Yeah.
So where are you using that for?
We're using it. We're prototyping some sensors at the moment. So we've been trialing a lot of different technology, MB IoT, LoRaWAN, Bluetooth. And we're having different mixed results because it's in relation to specific geographic coordinates, and obviously the accuracy, depending on the signal and depending on the sensor, is different. So it's been interesting, and I think it really just depends. The 5G use cases won't really come until later, until we have broad coverage in terms of actually using the 5G. We've obviously got a lot of work to do around process, around how we work together, around how we collaborate. What does it look like? What's the footprint of it? There's a lot of work to do before we even get to thinking about using it. But we're testing out LoRaWAN and Bluetooth and NB-IoT with varying results, and it kind of really depends if we're in amongst the tall buildings or if we're out in the kind of outside of the CBD HODL grid and the more open spaces, which means the signal kind of can get places more easily.
I don't yet hear a hallelujah sort of reaction from you. It's still trial and error.
Yeah, it's still trial and error, and I think that's fine. I mean, probably most of our established sensor networks use 4G SIM cards, so our smart bins and our pedestrian sensor networks use 4G SIM cards and have solid results. So yeah.
Okay, Simon.
Oh yeah, look, I think you're asking how some of these technologies come together. So I was making some notes. I mean, first of all, you said around the role of NBN and the mobile networks. I mean, I think for a long time they're going to be quite complementary in most cases. And I think, 5G radio on the end of a piece of fiber, I mean, it's a little bit more involved than that, unfortunately. And look, that's some of the, I suppose, that's where, maybe Wi-Fi is a bit like that, right? But some of the 5G, technology, think about things like security, and encrypting that traffic, and where does the key live, and the subscriptions and all those things. That's really what you're getting as part of the 5G. Then you've got mobility, so a user can move all around the network and still be connected and not, drop their phone call or whatever connection they've got. So yeah, it's probably a little bit more than radio technology on a fiber, but yeah.
Don't you as a backbone? Don't you need fiber for an?
Yes.
for a 5G network?
Yes, oh, look, pretty much. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the 5G use case. Definitely the mobile broadband ones. Yeah, of course, you need to get those high throughputs. You need fiber, and look, most of our sites today are connected via fiber, and have been for some time. All most 4G sites. There are some cases in very remote areas where we might use satellite backhaul, for example, but you know, you're going to be limited to what that satellite can do around throughput and latency. The other thing I was going to talk about is the or quickly around the low power WAN technologies. So the narrowband IoT technology that I had talked about is actually very much a standard technology and sort of part of 4G today, but it can operate in the 5G sort of alongside it as well. And that is standard. So I think our competitors operate that technology as well. They may have not been as marketed as much as us, probably because we have a much more significant coverage. But that's the important thing. There are some lower, some other alternative technologies that are used that maybe some others operate. I mean, one thing is we've got that the coverage, you know, that it is every, well, 4 million square kilometers of it. So you don't need to be concerned about that. So, I mean, it depends on the use case. That is, and then there's also the support. You know, we're committed to having this technology and this network operate for a long time. And I think Telstra will be around in 10 years. So when you deploy things like sensor networks and stuff, and you put it out there, you don't want to have to go to, you know, every rubbish bin to swap out a module because you find that technology is not going to operate, or, you know, the company behind it's disappeared or something. So that's probably an important consideration in the IoT space.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You know, it's still a bit. I think what Tegan also mentioned, trial and error, where the whole thing fits in. Because at a certain stage, you know, 5G is not cheap, of course. Yeah. The narrowband IoT is cheaper, yeah. I don't like the word cheap, but you know, you know what I mean, yeah. You know, so there will be horses for courses at a certain stage, you know, where you need, when you need the high quality of a 5G network, or where you can get away with another technology in that respect. So if you start looking at 5G, Simon, you also mentioned that there will be different configurations, yeah, of possibilities of 5G. Would that also then possibly, yeah, compromise the end use, you know, because you want to use it, you know, your boss was talking about also using it as an NBN competitor early next year. We are talking about 5G, obviously, to replace the 4G. So, you know, all our mobile phones need to be still working. Then you've got people like Tegan who want to use it for far more sophisticated applications. In the end, I mean, you know, how much do we have that we can split up and still all have these things, you know, reliable and effective, yeah?
Yeah, so I mean, the 5G, I mean, one key thing about 5G, perhaps compared to some of the other technologies, is it seeks to address a far broader range of, you know, technology characteristics. So some are very, you know, high bandwidth, not very mobile. Other ones are maybe very mobile applications. Others need low latency. Others need just the lot of power, low power and low cost, and don't care about latency and throughput. So that's a key thing about 5G, is that we often just focus on those mobile broadband use cases, but it's you know, a lot broader than that. So that's where we're focused on building out, and you know, the technology can do all of, well, the suite of technologies can do all of these things. So you know, lots to look forward to, but we're probably just at the tip of the iceberg on that.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, especially if you think about Melbourne and think about our main industries where we're known for being world leaders. We're known for the biomedical research that we do, but also the fintech work that we do. 5G for biomedical research is really exciting. You know, remote surgeries, being able to transfer massive files, even just being able to effectively collaborate with your with with your colleagues in the same building or in the same precinct will be massive, and the telehealth opportunities as well are going to be huge. So that's probably as a city, that's probably one of the most exciting possibilities that we can conceptualize right now. And understand where 5G and low latency and zero latency will massively benefit.
I mean that.
No, go, Simon.
Go. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, you know, and the intent is to make these much more flexible, these networks. So perhaps we might see, you know, 4G or 3G as a simple one network, and that's it. I mean, you know, now we start to see different things. So we see a 4G network. We kind of set our narrowband IoT network, but they're actually the same antennas and the same, you know, units and software that are running both, but they appear as two virtual type networks today, and that's almost like a network slice. And we'll probably see more of that, where, you know, from the public, you might see multiple networks, but they're all underpinned by the same sort of technology.
Yeah. Guys, it has been very interesting. I really appreciate your insights and your knowledge, and the fact that you have been sharing that with all of us. It's fascinating, and I would really like to thank you. And on behalf, because nobody else can hear you, on behalf of everybody else, you can hear me. Yeah. Thank you very much for a good presentation, and for sharing that with us. Thanks a lot. Couple of last minute things that I have to mention. The next session is on Monday, the 7th of September, and Dr. Ian Opperman, who I already mentioned him. He will be addressing that the next generation. I mean, it takes 10 years to get 5G. He's already talking about 6G. Oh my God, yeah. And Ian is also the president of ACS, one of the two organizers of this conference, together with ESCA, the Australian Smart Communities Association. So I would like to thank the ACS as well as ESCA, and particularly Mark, for organizing it all today. You already perhaps have seen on the chat a link to the presentations of today, but I also understand that Mark will send a separate email that you will get with the link to it. Everybody who is registered today is also registered for next week, and I think that was it for me. Thank you very much once again, and see you all next week. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.